Dave Gates here. In today's episode, part 3, interactive supports, we're going to look at how students and teachers can work together, the types of grouping and types of interactive structures that we can put in classrooms to make sure multi-language learners and ultimately all learners are more successful. So obviously the first structure is whole class structure. So here you can see in this photo from Canva that the whole class is together, the teacher is standing up front, the students are in rows, but it doesn't have to be like that. This is a little old school and traditional. Obviously, you could arrange your class in, I like to make circles, so it's more like a Socratic seminar style, and I'll have supports like that on my homepage, which you can see on my website, which you can see in the description of this video. Another type of support is small group supports. So as we move on, we're going to talk about the gradual release of responsibility. When we go from whole class work, where the teacher's giving the instructions or giving the lesson, then we can move to small groups where students might take on a task by themselves or with groups, and the teacher will go around and support them. Now, there's a bunch of different ways we can do this. Small groups can be generated randomly, or we can put together small groups based on the students' languages. So if we want to do some translanguaging and have students use their full linguistic repertoire, we can put, for example, all the Spanish-speaking students together, or all the Korean-speaking students together, all the Japanese-speaking students together, and they are able to support each other and help figure out and make meaning of new words as they approach text or tasks together. The groups can also be randomly generated, or they could be their friends, and it just depends on what the task is. So I like to do a mix of all of those. So sometimes I do random generated groups with Class Dojo. Sometimes I let them choose their own groups with their friends, and sometimes I put them in language groups or language levels based on their level of language development. For example, if I want to differentiate something and I want to have more advanced language learners reading maybe a little more challenging text, or a text at a harder, higher Lexile level, I might put the groups based on their Lexile levels, based on their RIT scores, based on their WIDA overall model scores. Those are different ways we can make small groups. And then we move on to partners, and the same idea applies with partners as it does with small groups. Those can be random. They can be just shoulder partners, table partners. They can be partners who speak the same language. They could be their friends. And then on my website, I'm going to talk about some different structured language practices, and there's a lot of ways where we can generate random partners and keep mixing it up so that students get to talk and interact with lots of different partners, and not just their friends, or not just the people who speak their first language. One great way to do that is with Uno cards. I like to give all the students Uno cards, and then I'll say, okay, all the people with red get together, or now we're going to find the people with the matching numbers. People with the same number get together. Or all the odds get together, or all the evens get together. So those are just different ways to make partners. I love this comic, this little strip I found. This is by What Ed Said, an educational blogger, and he created this outstanding cartoon of the gradual release of responsibility. And I love it because it starts off with the model, and it's the teacher giving the explanation, the talking, the showing them what they need to do. And then that's where the teacher models the expected outcomes. And then share, that's that small, maybe a whole class that we do together So maybe reading a text together as a whole class. And then the next step would be where the teacher steps back a little more, and it's the guided area, the watch me. That's the we do together, or sorry, the you do together. So that's the small groups and partners. And then finally, when students apply, they apply individually, and then the teacher really steps back to the side, and the teacher becomes smaller and smaller, and the students become bigger and bigger, and they have a more of a role to play. This is the traditional view of the gradual release of responsibility. I find that it's such a core interactive support for language learners, just having that gradual release of responsibility and having those systems in place and that consistency in place where students know what to expect. Recently, what Ed said, he redid his cartoon and made it in 2019. He made an inquiry-based model for it. And if you work at an international baccalaureate school like I do, if you know the IB program, it's all about inquiry. So he tried to remodel it based on inquiry. So here it's kind of flipped, where the students really start off first just releasing them and trying, exploring, and then the target is the teachers observing them, and then the teachers supporting and encouraging them, and then lastly you're trusting them to do what they need to do and cheering for them. So I like this as well. I feel like both have a place. I feel sometimes, however, for language learners, this model can be a bit overwhelming, especially for those more emergent language learners. Also for language learners coming from more traditional school systems, like I happen to work in Japan, so students coming from public schools in Korea, China, Japan, where they're really used to that more teacher-centered instruction, or kind of like the rote memorization and testing. This kind of education is a bit overwhelming for them at first, and they need to learn how to do this and how this system works. So I find with our language learners, this model works well for them in terms of learning new language, right? But in terms of inquiry, in terms of exploring new concepts, this model is really interesting. Okay, another interactive support to look at is the online forums and discussions. So I used to do Edmodo at my old school. Now at my new school, we use Google Classroom. I think a lot of teachers use that as well. There's lots of other platforms to use. PowerSchool Learning is an option. There are a lot of platforms. And then I find this is nice because for the students who are a little more introverted or shy, or they're stronger in their written skills than their speaking skills, they still get to interact with their peers, and they still get to express themselves. Another way to do that is through Padlet and Poll Everywhere. So Poll.ev is a great brainstorming tool, and students can interact online and share out ideas. There was one for the Poll Everywhere. There was for how we can make the classroom a safe space. What are essential agreements? So that creates a really democratic process, and where all the students get to share their ideas in a safe, comfortable way. Same with Padlet. Students can post and other students can reply. So these are really those kind of interactive supports that are helpful, not just for language development, but also as to help meet students' needs emotionally, and as their personalities differ from student to student. Another huge interactive support is randomized name calling. This is a big, big thing for me. Um, I'm a big fan of um, Class Dojo. And I know some teachers really hate Class Dojo, and I know why. It's fair enough, right? If it's all about giving the students the points, the little ding for the good job or bad job, I think there's definitely a fair argument to be made against it. That's not what I use it for. I primarily use it for the tools that are built in, and one of my favorite tools is the randomized name calling or the random group creators. So I can randomly call students, and this allows me to make sure I'm not just calling on the students who have their hands up. I don't just call on the students who want to participate. Everyone in the class participates. And so the one thing to be careful of is we all have different levels of language proficiency. So if I'm calling on somebody who's an emergent learner and they're just starting their journey in learning English, I have to be cognizant of that. And I can't just ask them maybe a phase 5 question. I have to maybe ask them a yes, no question that they're ready to take on, but I still want them to participate, right? That's a mistake a lot of people make, is when students are at that receptive learning stage where they're kind of silent, they're taking it in, and they're not producing a lot. A lot of people forget about calling on those students and making them part of a classroom. And that makes it just harder and harder for them to jump in and be a part of the classroom when they're ready. So I start at the beginning already. They are part of the classroom. They're part of the participation. They're part of every project we do. So if I get an emergent learner and then their name comes up, I just know I'm going to have to adapt the question. And rather than looking for a really elaborate response, it might just be like, yes, no. If it's somebody who really has zero English, they're a complete beginner, I still want them to interact. Maybe thumbs up, thumbs down. We want them to participate. Okay, we don't want them to be forgotten. That's a huge thing I like to advocate for multi-language learners. Another option is the random name picker from Classroom Tools. Some teachers like to use this. We like to call it the Wheel of Doom. I like this one because it eliminates a name every time you call one. So you'll never, with Class Dojo, it could call the same student twice or 3 times. With the random name picker, once the name is called, it gets eliminated. Okay. You don't have to do this with technology. If you're a low-tech kind of person, if you like to stay offline and not use computers and screens, you can do this with a deck of cards. I had a friend of mine, a science teacher, who would get a deck of cards from the dollar store and then just take a Sharpie and write every kid's name on it. Or I've even seen teachers do it with a picture of every kid on it. And then you just shuffle it, and then pull out the name. And then you can do that to make groups. You can eliminate the names so you don't want to call them twice. Or you can just shuffle it every time. And it's really fun. And that way we make sure all of the students are participating and everybody's going to interact with the teacher or the group at whatever level they can. Okay, and another interactive support is, of course, L1 use. L1 is a student's first language or mother tongue. I love this quotation from one of my students that I pulled. He or she said, "I feel frustrated when I can't express a phrase or sentence naturally in English, whereas in Japanese it comes completely natural." So I think many teachers have the misunderstanding that if they are allowing any form of L1 use in their classrooms, they're doing the students a disservice, and that's going to hinder their English language production. That's not actually the case. And actually, these days, we're really starting to swing away from calling students English language learners or ELL students, and instead we are starting to use the term multi-language learners. And that's because students are not just developing their English language, they're developing their mother tongue or L1 or L2, they're developing all their languages at once, and we need to honor that and support that. So if a student is learning a new word in English, they also need to learn that new word in Japanese, Korean, Spanish, German, whatever their first language is, because that's going to support their language development as a whole. And honestly, it works in tandem. Students with stronger L1 skills, surprise, surprise, have stronger skills in English. So it really helps to support students' L1 use, and it helps them to really make those connections and be explicit. I want you to develop your mother tongue. I want you to learn your language. I want you to learn how to say it in your family's language. Okay, well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you for watching. Again, please be sure to click on my website for lots of tools, strategies, tips, resources that you can use in your classroom to support your language learners and support English language development or any language development for your students. Have a good day.